Hi everyone, I'm Everton de Oliveira from the Groundwater Project, and we have today another book from an author that I really enjoy reading. That's a personal preference of mine, and he does a great job in all the books that he writes. And today we have another good example of his works. Is Franz Chapelle, and he's retired from a 40-year career with the U.S. Geological Survey in 2020. He has authored more than 130 peer-reviewed scientific papers and textbooks, work that won him the O.E. Meinzer Award in Hydrogeology, given by the Geological Society of America, and the U.S. Geological Survey Distinguished Service Award. Very good, congratulations. In addition, he has written 2 books for the general reader about competing mystical and scientific explanations of groundwater, the hidden sea, and a natural history of bottled spring water, well springs. Today, we're going to bring him to talk about his very new production, Hydrogeology and Geochemistry of Bottled Spring Waters in the United States. Again, congrats for your great work. I told you already, I am a big fan of yours. Thank you very much. Welcome, and how have you come up with the idea of this book? And why does this matter? Please welcome, Frank.
Okay. Well, I started in groundwater chemistry, and that's what got me into microbiology eventually. But, obviously, if you look at groundwater chemistry, it changes radically from place to place.
Yeah.
And so being a water chemist, that's what was interesting to me. I wanted to know why, first of all, what the chemistry was, and then I wanted to know why it was like that. Well, and I got involved with the bottled water industry kind of as a unpaid, I don't want to say consultant, but it was in it was something called the Drinking Water Research Foundation. And so I kind of got involved with the bottled water industry. And the bottled water industry is from a business point of view, it's very competitive. What water is considered good, what water is considered not so good. And so that's what got me interested in. And I was a little surprised in people in the industry. They had almost no interest at all into why their water was either good or bad. And so that kind of intrigued me. That seemed illogical. But at the same time, it was said, well, why would that be? Well, that's what got me interested in how regional geology affects the water chemistry of groundwater. And, O.E. Meinzer, who was kind of, Oscar Meinzer was kind of the father of water chemistry in the U.S. Geological Survey in the early 20th century, in the 1920s. And he was very experienced. He went around the country and he noticed that hydrologic units in various parts of the country had certain things in common. And so he divided the United States up into what he called 22 different groundwater provinces, where the chemistry and the geology was vaguely similar in each of these quote provinces. Well, that got updated in the 1950s by someone who, I'm sorry to say, I can't remember his name, but in the 1980s, another USGS guy named Ralph Heath, he divided the United States into 13 different provinces, and or what he called groundwater regions, and which the water chemistry was vaguely similar because sometimes it's in a mountain, sometimes it's in a desert, sometimes it's in Florida is a tropical area, so there are very different areas, and so the water chemistry is different. Well, how does that affect the water chemistry, and how does that affect the marketing of bottled water? And that's what kind of got me interested in this. And so when I was writing this book for the Groundwater Project, I mean, Ralph Heath had done marvelous work in defining the various groundwater regions. And if you look at the book, I've had he was also a wonderful artist. And so I wanted to put a lot of the illustrations from his 1984 paper into this book, because I couldn't have done better. Okay. And so anyway, that's what led to this book. And so I was familiar with many of these regions, the eastern United States especially. And I had traveled, through most of the country during my career. And so for this book, I proposed to John Cherry, I said, why don't we look at the various groundwater regions and see what the kind of chemistry was observable, and how did that affect the bottled water industry in each of these regions? And so that's what this book is about. And like for example, the northeastern United States, the first spring that was actually bottled in a big way was Saratoga Springs, of I guess horse racing fame also. And so in colonial times, people had visited the Saratoga, or I should say the Native Americans considered these springs to be healing. And so they would actually take Europeans who they, I guess, liked to the springs if they had various kinds of ailments, and they would claim to have this water heal them. Now, that's very much in the European tradition of healing spring waters, which goes back, at least to the Romans. And so there was nothing particularly new about that, but that's what got the bottled water industry in the United States started. And it was basically for health reasons. Well, that kind of changed in the 19th century as medicine kind of got to be less of a, or more of a scientific approach to it. But in America, the problem was a lot of the municipal water in places like Philadelphia and New York were taken right out of surface waters, and it was contaminated by various things. And so the American bottled water industry grew up beginning at about the 1850s as a source of spring waters, which were less contaminated by various microorganisms than the surface waters. And that's so in America, it became something of a way to avoid it became a way to avoid some of the epidemics that were endemic in the 19th century. And, typhoid, for example, and I guess there were various other diseases that they were. And so that's where the American bottled water industry started. And it started with spring waters. I guess a good example would be Poland Spring, which is in the state of Maine. And it was a very low total dissolved solids spring water. And it was actually interesting because it was basically, it was in a volcanic, it was in a glacial terrain. And so it was essentially almost unfiltered rainwater. So it had a very low dissolved solids content of about 30 or 40 milligrams per liter. And it also had a very low pH, about 5 or 5.5. And so in the 19th century, one of the large industries in the northeastern United States was the whaling industry. Well, the people found out pretty quickly that if they put this spring water into wooden barrels with its low pH and low TDS, that it would actually not spoil nearly as fast as other waters. And that's where Poland Spring got their start in the bottled water industry, was putting water in barrels for whaling. So that's kind of where the United States bottled water industry differed from Europe, in the sense that it was more interested in low TDS drinking water as opposed to mineral waters, which is what many people in Europe actually prefer to this day. Yeah. So anyhow, that's how this all came about.
Let me ask you one thing. You believe, I believe you brought a very nice and elegant way to explain the perception of good and bad water. That's nice, put on your book. Could you tell us a little bit about your explanation in there? And does this perception varies from place to place?
In the 1980s, the U.S. Geological Survey started a program called the National Water Quality Initiative, NAQUA, National Groundwater Quality. And the idea was to define the quality of water, not surface water and groundwater, in the United States. Well, that's all well and good, but it kind of requires a definition of what is good and what is bad water quality. And it was kind of interesting to me that that really wasn't what the USGS was interested in. The idea was, I think, that all we had to do was analyze what was in the water and use that as a criteria for water quality. Well, that is an objective way to look at water quality, but that's not how people look at it. People are interested in not just the objective, low TDS, high TDS, but it's also what they prefer, okay? Yes. And so there is always a subjective component to, quote, water quality. And this goes all the way back. In the 17th century, there was a philosopher who decided that he could quantify the quality of artwork. He could quantify what was good art and what was bad art. Well, that irritated a guy named Immanuel Kant, who thought, no, that's not the way it works. You have objective characteristics of anything, but you also have the subjective as to whether that pleases or doesn't please people. And so he said, and again, this goes back to the 18th century, that the term quality is not really, it's not quantifiable. It's more, perception of quality is more of an event than anything else. What happens when the objective characteristics of anything meets the subjective desires of human beings. And so that's one reason why what is considered water quality varies so much between individuals and between, the European perception of it or the American perception of it. Is you can never get away from the subjective component of quality. And it was actually interesting. I wrote a paper about that and published it in the journal Groundwater. And the name of the paper was, "What Does Water Quality Mean?" And it was basically to go through and the idea that the USGS could use objective characteristics in order to define quality is something that, well, you can't do it. Okay. And one example was I was visiting a city out west, and they had drilled a well in order to do the for water supply. And it turns out that because it was in the Rocky Mountains and it's a tectonically active area, the water was very warm. Well, it had all the objective characteristics in terms of there weren't any pollutants in it, there wasn't any microorganisms in it. But the thing was, it was 80 degrees centigrade. Well, people don't want that kind of, they turn on the cold water, they want the water to be cold. So that in that case, the water quality was not sufficient for what the people wanted, and so they couldn't use it.
Amazing. That's it. That is interesting. That's quite interesting. But I like the way you put by bringing Immanuel Kant into the game. That was very, very nice. I love it. I love it. So from Perrier to today, the Perrier is a big famous water, right? To today's bottled water industry. Could you anticipate something to your future readers, please? Because you put the sequence in a nice way there.
It's very interesting. If you look at the history of water drinking in the Western world, I mean, in Europe and in America, there have been cycles of where, I mean, in the Middle Ages, drinking water was considered to be a dangerous thing to do because much of the water, was contaminated by fecal matter and that kind of stuff. And so the only people that actually would drink water in many places were the people who had no choice because they were poor. So drinking water has gone up and down in popularity, should we say. It was very unpopular in the Middle Ages, and then when the Europeans started bottling water from various springs, like Baden-Baden is a good example. There are several Italian, and it became popular because it was something that originally only very rich people could do because they could actually go to the spring. But when bottling became cheap enough so that you could actually bottle the water, it became very popular. Well, and the same thing basically happened in the United States in the 19th century. It became very popular because it was considered to be clean. Well, something happened in America in about the year 1917, where engineers finally figured out how to put liquid chlorine in water supplies to make it safe to drink. Well, that was a new thing under the sun. People absolutely loved it, and it almost killed the bottled water industry, which had grown through much of the 19th century. The bottled water in America essentially went away in the 1920s and 1930s. And it went like that until about the 1960s or 1970s, when all of a sudden Perrier water hit the market in the United States and became very popular. And it's really ironic because it became popular in the city of New York. Well, the city of New York has one of the best water quality systems, municipal water quality in the world. And yet it wasn't good enough for the New Yorkers. They wanted to have Perrier, and it was expensive, it was cool, it was European. And so the bottled water industry exploded in the 1970s. I remember I'm a runner, okay? And so in the 1970s, I was running the Baltimore Marathon. And I ran the Baltimore Marathon, and you get to the end of the race, and everybody's tired and everybody's thirsty. And there was bottled water. I had never seen it before in my life. And so that's where I first came, and I thought, wow, this is cool. because it was attractive, it was nice, and it tasted great, and I was pretty thirsty too. So anyway, so the bottled water industry grew hugely, and it is still growing now, but it's changing. It is very interesting as to how it's changing. In the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s, it was spring waters, which were very popular. But now what you get is you get a lot of flavored waters. You get a lot of things from different places, and it has, one of the things that I noticed when I was writing this book was that high pH waters have become very popular for some reason, which I don't understand.
Either.
So what's going to probably happen if I was to predict what the bottled water industry is going to do? There's always going to be a niche for the spring waters and things like that, but the flavored waters, the waters of other things, that's probably where the industry is going.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. In one of the IAH congresses in France, we had an experience, that was prepared by the young professionals there. We went to a bar, right? And we were offered bottled waters from France, from different places, and we get bottled water without any label on them, all bottles in the same way, right? I don't remember. I guess we had 5 different waters, and we were next to we as hydrogeologists, we were asked to match pH, TDS, and the likely region that the water came from in France. And of course, they gave us a geological map so we could try to relate the quality of the water to the geology, for the dissolved solids and so on. And that was quite interesting. But the waters in France, they have very high TDS, many of them,
Right.
which is not typical in US or Canada or Brazil, where I have lots of experience. We're not the same market. How do you think this exercise could be done in US, for example? Is it likely that people could match the regions to the water flavors? What do you think?
Well, I think so. For example, if you looked at the western, the Rocky Mountain region in the United States, where much of the water, is coming from, high altitudes in the mountains, and it has relatively low TDS.
Yeah.
And so so that's the kind of water you would get like at Mount Shasta in California is a good example. Um, that water has been bottled for since the 19th century, and it's low TDS, and it's and that's the kind of. But anyhow, if you go to the southwestern United States, in Arizona, New Mexico, that were areas in the Basin and Range physiographic province, then the TDS tends to be very high, and the pH tends to be very high too because of the Basin and Range geology. Now, they actually market that water in places like in Phoenix, Arizona, as having high pH and high TDS and saying it's good for you. Okay. So yeah, you can go to different places in the United States and you get very different kind of waters. And it's very interesting to see, bottled people who do the bottled water industry, they're very clever. And, if they can take a water which would be not palatable, say, in the Pacific Northwest and market in the Southwest as being, then go for it. And again, if the people in the Southwest are seeing that this higher TDS, higher pH water is actually good and beneficial, that's their subjective evaluation, and
Yeah.
Go for it.
Interesting.
So you could actually do that in the United States. You could do something similar to what you're describing in France,
Yeah.
where you could take a water from the Northeast, the Southwest. Florida is a good example um, of how the water changes, the chemistry changes dramatically as it flows along the water, the hydrologic gradient. And so you could play that game. It'd be interesting to do at a GSA meeting sometime.
Yes, I
You
guess
want to do that?
I would love to. I just don't have time. So many things I would love to do, but that's quite a nice work to be done. I'm pretty sure. So could you try to relate that a little bit better to the 13 regions that you presented earlier for us, and that's in your book, right? Can you make a brief description of the waters into the 13 regions? Not all of them, but most like you've been doing already in the last answer you gave.
Well, a good one of the more interesting chapters in this book that when I was researching it was in Hawaii, in the western, the Pacific Islands.
Yeah.
And of course, in the big island of Hawaii, you have these very high mountains, and so you have a lot of rainwater recharge, and so you have very different water quality depending upon the elevation that the water is taken from. And the other thing about Hawaii is because the basaltic aquifer is so highly permeable, there's very little hydrologic gradient. And so if you go, you can't just drill wells in most of part of Hawaii and actually find water. And so you can't just sample the water in order to get an idea of where it comes from. And the hydrologists that study this in Hawaii have come up with some very cool, use of environmental isotopes to say, okay, well, this is the elevation that it was recharged. This is the flow path that it has taken, and this is why the water quality is what it is. And it changes dramatically. The other thing, one of the bottled waters in the Kona region of Hawaii, which is a kind of a desert, so they don't really have a lot of low TDS groundwater. So what they do is they take Pacific Island water, they actually take water out of the Pacific Ocean, they reverse osmosis it in order to get the TDS down, and they actually market it as being Pacific water. And they actually sell that in Kelowna. And it's, again, the thing, people say, oh, well, that's cool. And that's what markets it. And they can make money selling that Pacific Island water. And so,
That's
yeah, the thing is every region, all those 13 regions, is going to have somebody somewhere in that region is going to have figured out a way to market whatever that groundwater quality happens to be. And, it could be, high pH, high TDS, it could be low pH, low TDS, it can be all these kind of different things. But somewhere in every one of those 13 regions, someone is able to market that water as bottled water and make a business out of it.
interesting, quite interesting. And what I can tell you, Frank, is that I like reading your book, but I can see that you had fun doing it, which is very good, and it transpires from your book that you had fun doing it. You like what you're doing. That's very nice, and that help us readers to get to the point on your book. Congratulations. So again, please, our time is up here. Make your final considerations and congratulations again for your nice book. I hope you have more time and more ideas to bring to us into more books. It will be a pleasure to read, I'm pretty sure. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, thank you. So, guys, we have here Francis Chapelle. The book is very, very nice. I do recommend you to take a look if you're not into the bottled water. Still, it's quite interesting for geochemistry and to learn how things can be organized in a huge country like US. You still have all the provinces that are divided to bring quality and to put a good thinking on understanding water, and make sure you learn that, because water is a big issue in our century, and quality of water distribution, groundwater is going to be up to many more people than we expect. And Frank did a great job for us. Thank you very much, Frank. Congratulations again.